Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 131, with today's guest, Aaron Fifield from Chat with Traders.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
Hey, it's Adam Franklin here, and I am your host today on the Web Marketing That Works podcast. This is the show for people like you and like me who love marketing on the web. You'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments. I'm going to show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. The guest today is Aaron Fifield, and he's going to confess what's failed for him and reveal the truth about what really works. Now, the show is brought to you by our book that Toby and I wrote. It's called Web Marketing That Works, and it's actually our book's second birthday at the moment. It was June 2014 that the book hit the virtual shelves on Amazon. Thousands and thousands of people have bought the book and found it valuable too, I might add. So if you're one of the listeners of the show that hasn't yet checked out our book, I encourage you to go ahead and buy it. It's $25 US. And if you're interested, please head to bluewiremedia.com.au. You'll see a picture of the book on the homepage. Simply click the book and that will take you to the page where you can pay for it with PayPal or your credit card, and you will get a physical copy delivered to your door. Of course, there are also the 33 marketing templates that are included in the book, but as a podcast listener, that is your gift for listening today. If you'd like to get your hands on those, please head to bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Okay, so today's guest is Aaron Fifield. You may know him as the host of the Chat with Traders podcast. He's had an interesting story. He started as a web designer/graphic designer, did that for a while, got a bit sick of it, decided to become a trader, as in trading stocks on the financial markets, and then he decided to start his podcast, Chat with Traders, where he interviews some of the big names and some of the off-the-radar traders in the financial world. He does this as pretty much his full-time business now, does some day trading at night. He's going to tell you a whole lot more about that on the show, but he is also going to be speaking live at the We Are Podcast conference on the Gold Coast in Australia in October 2016. So if you're keen to head along, I'll be speaking at it as well. We'll talk more about that on the show, but check out wearepodcast.com and it would be cool to meet you there. So look, with that introduction, let's head on over to the show. My name's Adam Franklin, and on the line I have Aaron Fifield from the Chat with Traders podcast. How's things?
Very good, Adam. Awesome to be here, man. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
It is a big pleasure. Now let's talk a little bit about this podcast. It's Chat with Traders. What's that all about?
Good question. So essentially, Chat with Traders is a podcast I started in January 2015, about mid-January. It's a weekly podcast. I interview consistently profitable traders. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the term traders, I'm referring to guys who are actively buying and selling financial products in the financial markets. So that's it in a nutshell. I release one episode every week, and yeah, it's sort of been on the up and up. So
that's nice. We'll loop back around to the podcast again, of course. But are you a trader yourself?
I am. So I wouldn't call myself one of the consistently profitable traders that I am. I'm working towards it. That's obviously the ultimate goal. So I'm probably what you'd call a developing trader. I've been into trading myself for a few years now, and I can't say I've had any huge success at this point, but I haven't had any huge failure either, touch wood. So yes, I'm definitely a trader myself, and that's essentially why I started this podcast.
So are you trading just your own money, or are you trading other people's money as well?
Thankfully, just my own at this stage. I wouldn't expect anyone to hand over their hard-earned money to me at this stage. Maybe further down the track, that's something that would definitely appeals to me. but probably not for a few years yet.
Okay, so just just to clarify, so a trader is someone who's basically looking at the stock market throughout the day and looking to buy and sell shares on a pretty regular basis, not hanging on to them for any great period of time. Was that the idea?
Essentially, yeah. So, I mean, the big difference between, an active trader and an investor, a trader will typically, so there's a few different sorts of traders. You've obviously got a day trader who's actively buying and selling throughout the day and will probably be flat, hold no positions overnight. And then you've got kind of like your swing traders, which is what I would classify myself as. So that's someone who might hold a position or hold some stock for anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks, or maybe even a couple months if that goes well. Whereas an investor is typically someone who's more of a buy and hold sort of person. So that's not really my field. I'm more focused on the active trading.
Right, that must be pretty exciting, seeing the stocks go up and down and realising you've got a position or money in the skin in the game sort of thing.
It is when it works in your favour. Opposite effect when it moves against you, I can tell you that much.
I bet. So what was one of the reasons you started the podcast?
Essentially, I started the podcast out of frustration. That was really my motive for starting the podcast. I was frustrated with where I was at with my trading. And one day I looked around and I sort of realised that I didn't know any other traders. I didn't know anyone who even had the slightest interest in financial markets. So I've always understood myself very clearly that, if you want to learn something, if you want to be great at anything, you've got to learn from those who are already where you want to be, or if not, further ahead than where you want to be. So that was really my motive for starting the podcast. I saw it as a means to connect with some of these traders, some, decent, successful traders. It gave me a reason to connect with them that I might not otherwise get the opportunity to. That was probably the main incentive. I also wanted to build up sort of a bit of a network of just other traders who are maybe at similar sort of stage in their journey as I am, and that sort of thing. So I just really wanted to throw myself into it. At the time I was running when I first started this, I had my graphic and web design business, which I was running. It wasn't really something I wanted to be doing. I sort of saw starting a podcast as an opportunity to start what's essentially become a business, doing something I'm interested in, doing something that I'm keen to learn more about myself. So I guess that, in a nutshell, was the reason why I started the podcast.
So you've virtually come full circle. So you started doing design and web development for other people, quit that, became a trader, and now you've got a foot back in the content marketing, online publishing camp as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've always been very keen online business and just, internet companies, entrepreneurship, all that stuff really appeals to me. I just didn't really like doing the graphic and web design work for other people. I've been doing it for a few years and I just it was very difficult to scale, but I mean, I guess that's a conversation for another day. At the end of the day, it just wasn't something I wanted to be doing. And trading was something I've been passionate about for a few years now. And, I just sort of thought nothing's really changed much over this few years. If I want to really make something of this, something has to change. As they say, what's that saying? Definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I mean, I think that's probably one of my favorite quotes. So I really just wanted to change and just sort of immerse myself in a subject that I wanted to learn more about. I've been lucky enough to sort of make a bit of a business around it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, we've been on a similar journey. Our business started out doing graphic design and web design for people, and we did that for a number of years and gradually sort of stepped out of it to do more things that were scalable, things that we enjoyed doing more, and now we're much more where we are an online education company. We also do the podcast, obviously. You're listening to it now, and blogs and everything else, and online training courses, but also the in-person stuff as well. So have you been able to take this podcast and turn it into a business per se?
I would say so. I would say so more this year than the first year when we started it. That was probably one of my mistakes when starting the podcast, is I was maybe a little bit naive about the input it was going to require from my side. And like I said, my main motive for starting the podcast was not to make huge amounts of money from it or anything like that. So I just sort of started the podcast because I wanted to expand my network and I wanted to speak with traders and learn from guys who were successful. So I just really jumped into the podcast, started doing it, and then I sort of realized that, as the podcast was growing, this really could become a business. And so, essentially I would call it a business. It's what I work on pretty much throughout my day, every day, and obviously keep the evenings free, generally for my personal trading and that sort of thing. But our main revenue or the main breadwinner at this point in time is definitely sponsorships.
Okay, so how does that look? You get a certain number of downloads per month and you then take that to potential sponsors?
Yeah, so downloads per month, not so much. We quote potential sponsors based on per 1,000 listeners within the first 6 weeks. So I sort of decided, everyone's going to be different with their own podcast and how they decide to go about this, but for me, it made sense that I measured the number of downloads within the first 6 weeks. Counting the monthly total number of downloads per month isn't really that useful to a sponsor. It kind of gives a sense of the listenership you have, but on a per episode basis, the actual episode that a sponsor is going to sponsor, they're really only interested in how many downloads that episode is going to get. So, we measure from the day it goes live to 6 weeks, the average listeners that we get in that period of time. And, that's how we put a price on the sponsorship. It obviously goes off a per 1,000 listener basis.
Okay, so you started, middle of 2015, I think you said. How much have your numbers grown since the start?
Okay, so obviously when we first started, we were right around zero. But right now, as of today, I think we're around about 1.4 million downloads on the podcast and averaging around about 17,000 downloads per episode within the first 6 weeks. Maybe a little bit more, but I tend to I'd rather over-deliver than under-deliver. So, we quote sponsors right at this point in time about 17,000 guaranteed listeners within the first 6 weeks of a sponsored episode going online.
And how long into this podcasting journey was it until you actually got your first sponsor on board?
So we didn't take sponsors until the very beginning of this year, being 2016. And probably could have started quite a bit sooner. It was something I was very uncertain about it. Well, I wasn't sure if it was something I actually wanted to do, was to take sponsors. I'd always been very sensitive of my listenership and my audience. And I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to do sponsors on the podcast, but, it seemed like a viable solution. And to be honest, I haven't had any negative feedback from taking on sponsors. I've actually had some positive comments about it, which has been interesting. So, that's one thing I was a little bit worried about, and that's probably one reason why I waited, almost a year until we actually took on our first sponsor. So anyway, I'm glad we've sort of crossed that bridge now, and it's something that we're doing it pretty much every week.
Oh, that's good. Because, often of course, you're doing your listeners a favour if the sponsor's message is actually aligned to what people want to find out about.
100%, yeah. I've been pretty selective on who I do and don't accept sponsorship from. Like, obviously, I'm actively pitching companies to sponsor the podcast. But there's also been a few companies that have approached us about sponsoring the podcast, which I've just sort of politely said, thanks, but no thanks. Just because I want to be very conscious of the sort of companies that I align my brand, the podcast with, got to be very careful of that. Otherwise, you'll probably get some negative kickback from your audience.
Yeah, totally. So aside from the sponsorship, are you doing other things like monetizing any other ways by selling other sort of courses to your listeners or any other books or affiliate products like that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I did have, like a lot of podcasts do, I did have a resources page which had a bunch of affiliate links on it for different, education, courses, services, products, all stuff that was relevant for benefiting traders. I had that page online for a little while and it didn't really get any traction. So I've ended up just pulling that down. Affiliate links is just something I'm not really interested in anymore. I sort of tried it a little bit. If someone who comes on the podcast has a product it's never the purpose of the podcast to push that product, but we might just give an affiliate link a mention right at the beginning. I know that's happened a couple of times, and it's quite rare though. So affiliate links is not really something I do or am interested in. I know some people do have huge success with affiliate links. You got to do is look at Pat Flynn. He's a prime example of that. We have a $15 ebook, so it's just a premium ebook, which is available through the website at chatwithtraders.com. But, I don't really push that too much. It's just kind of there if someone decides to purchase it. We also have a number of free ebooks. And the other way I keep saying we, it's really only myself.
Yeah.
It's just a bad habit. The other way I did attempt to monetize the podcast was I offered a one-on-one coaching with some of the past guests who had been on the podcast. So there was 3 guests / traders who had been on the podcast, and I sort of spoke with them, and we had an arrangement where listeners or visitors to the website could purchase a one-on-one coaching session with these traders and get direct access to them through the website. That was something I did put out there. That was probably around 9 months into, and that was probably a bit of a fail. I'd have to say it was a bit of a fail. It didn't really result. It wasn't really that well received. We didn't really get any negative feedback from it or anything like that. It wasn't like our audience was annoyed that we were offering this, but it just wasn't really something that caught on. And I feel like it did give it a pretty good push. Like, I think anyone who obviously listened to the podcast was aware that it was available, but it's just not really something that caught on. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, just sponsorship is really the main breadwinner right now. And given those numbers, taking 2 sponsors per episode,
Nice. It's all part of the journey, isn't it? Seeing what works and what doesn't work, and that's what I'm so passionate about.
Absolutely.
Myself, when I test things out and speaking to people like you to see, what gets traction and what doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like that one-on-one coaching, I genuinely believed it was an awesome opportunity to get access to these guys, like purchase a 60, 90-minute one-on-one session with these guys. I thought that would be awesome. I'm not really sure why it didn't work out so well, but, it's not to say that it wouldn't work for someone else in a different industry. So, just because it didn't work for me necessarily doesn't mean it wouldn't work for someone else who might be listening to this and have the ability to do something similar.
Yeah, it always is, hey. And what do you reckon has contributed most to your increase in listenership, like starting out at 0 and getting up to the numbers that we were talking about before? Have you been actively pushing it like on social media or via email, or has it been organic growth? Like, what are your insights there?
Yeah, a bit of everything. I mean, probably the thing I really obsess over, and I think that some people don't do this as much as they perhaps could, I really obsess over engagement with my audience. So I always encourage, listeners of the podcast to send me an email or hit me up on Twitter, or, if they send me a message on Facebook or whatever it might be. I always make an effort to respond and help where I can. Like I said right at the beginning, I'm not by any stretch a huge and successful trader, but I, obviously know a little bit. I've gained a lot of knowledge from doing these interviews. I try to help out where I can and just engage with my listeners. So that's a big thing. If you do that, you'll find that a lot of other, podcasts or blogs in your niche don't do that. It's going to make you stand out a lot more. You've started to form a bit of a relationship or an actual proper connection with someone. So, make an effort to engage with your audience. I think also just being consistent. So one of the things I do with the podcast is same time every week I drop a new episode. That's definitely helped, is being consistent, because listeners know when to expect new episodes. And if you're doing one episode a week or one episode a fortnight, whatever your schedule is, if you just stick to it, it starts to build up pretty quickly. And before you know it, you've got a pretty decent amount of content there. I think one of the other things which has worked well for the podcast is having a good mix of guests. So I've had a lot of guests on the podcast who are quite big names, who are very well known in the industry. But I've also had some guys who are not so well known, some guys who kind of fly under the radar a little bit. So I think it's good to have a bit of a mix. I mean, not so much in trading, but some of your entrepreneurship type of podcasts, which are interview style, you often see the same names kind of popping up again and again, which is fine. But I think it's also good to have a mix of people who are, not so well known, because, they also have value to share with your audience. So I think that's something worth noting as well.
And have you found your audience that listen to the podcast are naturally or organically migrating over to your email list as well?
Bit hard to say. I mean, I've pretty much every page on the website has an opportunity for you to enter your email address. So we've got a whole range of different ebooks, exclusive interviews, different things that people can actually download for free, obviously in exchange for an email address. It's a bit hard to say how many people, do it from listening to the podcast. I often will mention on the podcast, I'm like, to get an exclusive interview that's not released on the podcast, go to this URL, enter your email address and download it for free. That's something I do, or whether that be an ebook. So that helps. I mean, current figures, our list at this point in time is about 11,000. So I don't know if that kind of puts it into perspective.
That's pretty good. That's really good, especially if you've only started in 2015. So I think that's good growth, really good growth.
Cool.
So that must mean, I reckon, you're getting quite a few direct visitors to the website, maybe that through search, or who don't necessarily know your podcast but are maybe Googling for information about trade stories with traders, would you reckon? Or you reckon most of them coming straight from the podcast?
A lot of the traffic to the website actually comes from Twitter. I think probably direct or search is probably a little bit higher, which could probably be expected. But Twitter is actually a really big traffic generator for Chat with Traders, at least. One of the reasons for that being is, and this is something which has been very helpful to me, is that finding a platform where your audience is most active on. Twitter, as strange as it sounds, has a really active trading community. So my go-to platform above everything else is Twitter, and that's where I put most of my energy. So yeah, it's working quite well and driving traffic to the website as well. So yeah.
That's really interesting, because me personally, I guess in the marketing space, I'm tending to spend less time on Twitter, and I still schedule a lot of posts for our podcast and our blog, but I'm finding the traffic from there is not as high and the interaction isn't as high. But that's really interesting that Twitter, for you and your niche, is working really well. How often are you posting per day?
I mean, I maybe do a new post maybe 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes once a day. I mean, I'm not the most active in posting new stuff, like new content on Twitter, but I often interact with my listeners on Twitter. So, someone might tweet me and they might say, something like, really enjoyed this week's episode. They like this about it. So I'll, respond to that person. So if you count all my tweets, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 tweets a day.
Yeah, okay, cool. Any other social platforms that you're using, like Instagram or anything else?
So, yeah, I mean, I am using Instagram, not very active on there. I don't know. I just can't get into it. I've tried. I've really tried. Just not really. I just don't really like it. One of the things we have done very recently is opened a actual Facebook group, not a Facebook page, a Facebook group for Chat with Traders. So opened that a few weeks ago. We've got about 1,100 members in it now, and it seems to be working out quite well. There's really good engagement in that group. Obviously, working up to 1,000 members, I was very active in there and making sure I responded to everyone and try to spark up a bit of conversation. But now it's quite organic. I mean, I'm still in there every day, joining in conversations and that. And yeah, Facebook group has worked really well. So I think that's, something, if you're not doing it, definitely something to give some thought to. And obviously it's a good way for me to, get new episodes in front of, listeners of the podcast as well. It's just another way to sort of, like I said, get it in front of them. You can pin your post to the top, and that way you've got a group, it's got 1,000 members in there, and your post is pinned to the top for however long it's there. So a Facebook group, yeah, that's the other thing I'd suggest.
And how much effort were you putting in? You said you're in there every day, but to get it to that 1,000-person point, like how much pushing did you have to do to get people chatting and to get people turning up and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I guess because I just launched it in the last couple of weeks, I mean, we've got a bit of an audience now, you know what I mean? So we've got the email list. I did one email just to let people know there's a Facebook group does exist. You're welcome to join. It's free. Come in. So, you know, I did that. I mentioned on the podcast a couple of times, you know, and it didn't really take too much effort to get, you know, people joining in and starting conversation. You know, if I had have started the Facebook group, you know, 3 months in, it obviously would have taken me much longer to get to that point. But because of the kind of reach that I've been able to attract, it didn't really take too long to get to that point. Obviously, I still think it has a long way to go. So, you know, it's something I'm definitely actively working to try and grow, because I think it's awesome for engagement, much more than a Facebook page is pretty lame.
Yeah. There's not much doing on the odd Facebook page these days, is there? So are you doing better trades now that you've learned all this stuff from the guests you've had on the show?
I'd like to say yes. It's a bit tricky to answer. I've really taken a different avenue with my trading since I started the podcast. So I don't want to get too technical and go into it too much, but I've sort of gone from what you would call a discretionary trader. So essentially what that is, someone who sees something as a good opportunity, but there's some discretion, okay? So it's not a systematic rules-based approach, okay? So they see something, but they take in a lot of information to decide whether they're going to buy or sell or take a trade or let it go. I've really taken a different approach, which is more of what quantitative / algorithmic approach to trading. Because of that, I've actually been spending quite a lot of my energy, time, and learning how to program and learning the ropes of actually quantitative trading systems. So if you were to measure my success in my profit and loss, there's probably not a great difference. But in terms of actual knowledge, where I'm headed, definitely much further advanced.
Okay, so a better trajectory of where you're going to be based on all the stuff you've been able to put into practice.
Trajectory is a good word. I like that.
Okay, so before we call it a day, Aaron, have you got any final words of wisdom or anything you'd like to get off your chest and share with our listeners?
Not really. I think we've covered a fair bit of ground. I mean, really it's just, I think just the key is just to be consistent, really focus on engagement and interacting with your audience, and that'll take you a long way. And always actively trying to improve and put out better and better content and just better serve your listeners, better serve your audience. So I think that's probably all I can say.
Wonderful. And where can people go to find out more about you, mate?
So if you want to check out the podcast for any reason at all, chatwithtraders.com. I'm also on Twitter, like I mentioned, at chatwithtraders, and I make an effort to respond to everyone on there. And you can also reach me by email if you have any questions at all about, you know, podcasting or running a blog or trading for that matter. Aaron, Aaron, at chatwithtraders.com.
Nice, mate. And finally, where's that accent from?
Well spotted. From New Zealand. From New Zealand. I moved over here when I was 12 years old and now I'm 25. So, yeah, it's a Kiwi accent. Yeah.
And you're living in Australia now?
I am, yep, in Brisbane.
In Brisbane, very good. I know there'll be some international listeners going, he's not quite Australian, but what's that accent? So I just wanted to find out from you. So which city in New Zealand?
You're going to laugh when you hear this. Wanganui.
Where's that?
That is.
Not a clue.
It's about, okay, do you know where Wellington is?
I sure do.
Yeah, so Wellington is bottom of the North Island. It's about 3 hours north of Wellington on the east coast. The west coast. You can tell I haven't been back in a while. Yeah, about 3 hours north of Wellington on the west coast, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Worth a visit?
No. No, there's not much happening there. It's a pretty small place, so it's nothing like Wellington.
I was going to say Wellington and Auckland are both beautiful cities, so yeah. Nice, mate. Well, yeah.
I was just going to say I'm actually hoping to make it back there maybe sometime this year. Maybe the South Island. I've never been down there.
Yeah, I like the South Island as well. And Gwen, just quickly, you're going to be at the podcasting conference at the end of the year.
Yeah, I am. I've actually convinced Bonsley to let me speak, so I'm pretty excited about that. That'll be my first actual speaking. So I believe the topic I'm going to be speaking about is actually sponsorship and how to get sponsors on your podcast, and maybe share a few unique ways to grow your podcast as well and get those numbers up.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. I'm also speaking, I think my topic is using podcasts to reach out to influencers and build relationships. So I look forward to hearing what you've got to say and seeing you again. And listeners, if you are able to make it to the Gold Coast in, I think it's, was it early November 2016?
I think it's October this year, actually.
October, okay. October 2016. It's well worth it. It was a great conference last year, and you'll be able to hear from Aaron on the day as well as many other good speakers. So Aaron, with that, thank you very much for joining us. Congrats on the success of Chat with Traders, and we appreciate your insights.
Thanks very much, man. It was a blast. Great to be on here.
Awesome, bud. Thank you. And that's a wrap for my chat with Aaron Fifield. Interesting, hey? The fact that you've had a podcast for 18 months and you're now up at over 1.4 million downloads in total, it's a really good effort. And 11,000 email subscribers, which in 18 months I reckon is very, very impressive as well. Getting good sponsorship through selling 2 sponsorship slots on the show. I didn't talk numbers. I know sometimes guests don't really always want to discuss the revenue they're making. Some do, but if it's a full-time income, then that's very cool. Not to mention, of course, the trades that make him some money on occasions and maybe lose money on other occasions too. It must take a pretty strong stomach and strong mind to be able to do that day trading gig. So look, I found what Aaron said very interesting. You know, like Twitter is really working for him. It's not working so well for me anymore. I mean, we're publishing lots of stuff through Edgar, through our blog content, our podcast content. I'm still interacting with people when they tweet me, but I find it's just getting a bit too busy for me, and maybe it's the niche that we're in with web marketing. But really interesting to hear from guests like Aaron that it's actually working well for him. So if you're listening and you're not in the web marketing niche, then maybe Twitter still has some life left in it for you. But I mean, by the same token, Aaron said he wasn't really getting into Instagram, didn't enjoy it. So each to their own. You only need a couple of social media platforms. You don't need to be on them all, certainly. That's a bad idea, being on them all. But you only need a couple where you can interact with your community, where people can get in contact with you. And you're better off doing just one or two than spreading yourself too thin across all of them. And I think that's really the moral of the story. Twitter works for him. Instagram doesn't. He's got a podcast going well. He's got a lot of email subscribers, and he's getting sponsorship dollars. So, everybody's got their own story. They're just different building blocks of his web universe. He's really strong in some areas and chooses not to be in others. And I think it's kind of like going to the gym. When you look at your web universe, you've got certain parts of it that you are really good at, and you've got weaker areas. And you don't need to be super muscly all round to be good at certain things. If you think of sport or swimming or running or whatever, you can have strong legs and weak arms and you can still be a great athlete. You can have strong upper body and weak legs and still be a fantastic athlete. So same analogy. I think it works with web marketing. Some guests have been really good at Instagram. Some guests have been really good at blogging. Aaron's a podcaster. He's got his email list growing. He's getting sponsorship dollars, and that works for him. So once you know all the different building blocks available, pick the ones that work for you and really double down on the ones that are working. So I hope that podcast interview has been useful. That is certainly my intent. And I'm always welcome to feedback, both positive and constructive. So please let me know, adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au, or tweet me at Franklin_Adam. And if you enjoyed the show, and I hope that you did, would love it if you took 60 seconds now to leave us a review on iTunes. We'll give a shout out to the 5-star reviewers, and I look forward to seeing you on the next show. See ya.